Greetings, everyone. I am thrilled and excited to do an interview today with my dear friend, Claudia Ford. And let me give you a brief summary of her bio, and then we're going to launch into a discussion about some of the new paradigms that we're needing to move into in these times in order to heal on the planet on all levels. But thank you for being here today, Claudia.
Thank you for asking me, Heather.
So, Dr. Claudia Ford has enjoyed a career in international management, development, and women's health spanning 4 decades and all continents. She is currently professor and chair of the Department of Environmental Studies at the State University of New York at Potsdam. She conducts research and teaching in ethnobotany, indigenous knowledge, gender studies and the sacred feminine, sustainable agriculture, spiritual ecology, environmental justice, environmental writing and literature, and international business, which shows what a Renaissance woman you are. She's also a visual artist and writer and an amazing mother and grandmother. So, and part of why I'm so thrilled to be in this conversation with you today, Claudia, is I so respect the depth of your wisdom, of your heart, of your passion for healing and justice, and how we can move into new ways of being on the planet that are about coming into more right relationship with each other and with the earth.
Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate that. And I've learned so much from you over the years talking about these topics. So it's great to have this conversation with you and to share it with others. I really appreciate that.
Well, and what's amazing, I mean, just reading your bio shows the range of experiences that you've had. I mean, from years of being a midwife, and a healer in that sense, to now teaching and writing and trying to bring new ways of seeing and new paradigms of healing for us on a more global level. And one of the things that I'd love to start with is you let me read a draft of a current paper that you're working on environmental radicalism. And one of the things you say in that paper is that we need fundamental change with respect to everything, and that there will be a special place for the environment within this global reorientation of society. But part of what you talk about in that paper is how we can't help heal our relationship with nature and with the environment if we don't radically change our cultural paradigms and ways of being with each other. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. And I was so fortunate to write that paper with my colleague, Dr. Matthew Levine. So I appreciate his energies and ideas around that as well. I think for both of us, fundamentally, we're talking about 2 things. One is that this development in consciousness, human consciousness, and planetary consciousness, this spiritual development is very much also tied to our relationship to nature, to land, to the environment. And those aren't all the same things, but just that whole realm of being like, we have to transform our understanding as humans of what our responsibility is to nature. And by healing nature, which is crying out for healing right now, something we can all feel, we also begin to heal ourselves. So this transformation in human consciousness is very much aligned to the environmental challenges that are going on. So that was one side of the picture. The other side of the picture is that the systems that currently structure our world and which have allowed this incredible level of destruction, where we see it in the environment and feel the destruction of nature, those are the systems that have to go. They can't be reformed. So there we're talking about white supremacy, we're talking about patriarchy, we're talking about capitalism, we're talking about all of the social structures that currently kind of dominate our social and economic world. They're in our minds not reformable. They really need to be transformed and in some cases just destroyed, because there are systems that have been so harmful not only to the planet but to our very souls, to our humanity. They're not serving us, and they're not necessary. And so we talk a lot in the paper about the fact that we are revolutionaries, right? So as soon as you say that word, people see you, kind of charging down the street with your signs and your fists up and wanting to burn everything down. And some of that might be true, but we actually see revolution as being creative and not destructive. We understand that people fear revolution, and traditionally those in power have tried to make the average people fear the very word and associate it with all kinds of destruction and violence, and we think that that's wrong. Even if you look at natural systems, you'll see that the impulse for revolt or revolution is inherently a creative one. And often what's being destroyed or has been destroyed or it's in the process of being destroyed needs to go. And so the revolt is the new systems, the new growth that comes up. So we talk about that as well. Like don't fear revolution. Actually, this is the time for it. It's such a fundamental change in worldview. It's such a fundamental change in our relationship to each other, to ourselves, and to the natural world, that we actually do need new systems to look at it. And so, yeah, it's an exciting position to be in. Certainly, we're not the only ones talking about that. Fortunately, there are lots of different ways to do it. We're not trying to say that there's only one way to do this, but we really are pushing forward the idea that the current systems that got us into the problems that we have are not going to be the systems that remove us from these problems.
Isn't it Audre Lorde who talks about you can't solve our current problems with the master's tools?
Right, you can't dismantle the master's house with the master's tools. Yeah, that's definitely, I think we quote Audre Lorde as well. That's definitely part of this. Like, what are the new tools? And it's not to be naive and say that there's no place, for example, for increased technology. Or artificial intelligence, or these amazing breakthroughs that are happening right now in science and in human anatomy and brain physiology, just enormous, tremendous breakthroughs. But if they're done without soul, if they're done without spirit, if they're done without heart, they're not going to work. They're only going to get us further apart. And we see that. You look at artificial intelligence and you see immediately that all of the problems of white supremacy, all of the problems of racial and gender discrimination and ableism are baked right into the AI. So we've got AI that's replicated our social problems. That level of technology is destructive. It's not helpful for us, even though AI in itself could be neutral and could certainly be helpful. The way it's been structured by the very people who are part of the system means that right now it is not.
Because those technologies then mirror the underlying paradigms and cultural themes, and those are what are needing to be dismantled.
Exactly. And again, all of this in service of this greater human consciousness development. So for me, that's often the missing piece, that many people are afraid to talk about. Certainly academics don't like to talk about spirituality unless they happen to be in the religion department, or maybe in the philosophy department, right? Which is great because Dr. Levine is a philosopher, so we're good. We're happy to talk about these things, but that's part of the new paradigm, is to just bring that in and be afraid, you know, no longer be afraid of speaking directly about issues of the spirit and the soul and the consciousness development. There's definitely pushback to that, but that's a symptom of how far into the materialism we've gone. And we're seeking balance, right? We need to come back into a different way of looking at things.
You know, when you talk, Claudia, about revolution and about this level of transformation that we need, it really reminds me of the energy of Pluto from an astrological perspective. And Pluto has been in the sign of Capricorn, guiding us to tear down, dismantle the systems and structures that no longer serve us, to move into these new paradigms, that it is a process of death, rebirth, of profound metamorphosis and transformation. And it feels like part of what you're talking about that's so destructive is what I see as the out of balance energies from the age of Aries, starting about 5,000 years ago, where we moved into these paradigms of separation from nature, from each other, of power over, led into white supremacy and competition and capitalism and control and exploitation of the earth. We got out of that sense of being in right relationship with each other and with all of life. And it sounds like what you're saying is we can't try to modify those paradigms. We have to radically change it.
Absolutely. And there are a lot of really hopeful things there. I mean, one is to realize that not all of us got as far away from those as others, right? We've always have had and remain with pockets of communities and societies and peoples who did not go as far out of balance, or at least realized the out of balance nature of the more general social world, and even if they were powerless to do anything about it, kept alive their own traditions, their own indigenous knowledge, their own local wisdom about how things were from their ancestors many thousands of years ago, and so how things could be and needed to be. So it's not like we're going backwards to that, but it is as if we kept that ember alive, right? It's not a flame. It's certainly been doused by modern society, but there's still this little tiny spark, this hot coal, right? That the fire can be started again, because it's a human knowledge, that the knowledge of connection, the knowledge of benevolence, of helping each other. It is not human nature to be competitive. And, most of us in science know how Darwin's words were twisted, right? Survival of the fittest does not mean competition. It actually was talking about reproduction. And it was pretty basically saying that, those who can reproduce, meaning those species who can reproduce can survive, which is almost,
Except yes.
Yeah.
And when I was talking to Elizabeth Sahtouris, she, the evolution biologist,
Right.
she was talking about how Darwin's theory was based on the current economics of the time. And one of her points that I think we really have to take in and reframe our scientific understanding of evolution is that all species go through an early developmental phase of competition and soon learn that for their own ability to survive and thrive, they need to move into cooperation and collaboration and interdependence. But we as humans haven't gone, well, we've, I believe, been in those states of being in right relationship in the past, but we've really gotten out of balance in the last 5,000 years and forgotten that that way of being in competition leads to our own self-destruction, and that we need to learn how to collaborate and care and share with each other.
Absolutely. And it's so exciting that the seeds for that and so much knowledge, so much wisdom is there, right? It's not as if we're completely in the dark looking for something that we don't have access to. It's also in our body memory. It's in our evolution, as you say. So it's part of who we are, to go back to these more functional ways of relating to each other and to the world and to nature. So that gives me hope, which is necessary for this journey, right? Because it is a particularly troublesome, dark, scary moment that we're in right now. And I know this summer, like many people, but for me, this summer particularly, I felt a deep sense of climate grief. I think it was the simultaneous fires, heat waves, everything that we were having happen at once. And the fact that it seemed like a larger number of people were beginning to accept that the climate change is a real thing. So yeah, it was a tough moment this summer.
So given all of that, how do you see that we can take steps to be in that change process?
Well, what I see is that it happens at different levels, and that we have to attend to all of them kind of simultaneously. So at the individual level, our own growth and development remains important, right? We can't do this without paying attention to who we are in the world, trying to get to know who we are, what our purpose is, how we can improve our relationships by understanding ourselves. All the energy that we put into self-knowledge and self-development is important, as long as it's not just for the purpose of the self, right? It has a greater purpose, which is to connect us to others. But it's really important that we do that work, that we do the work of knowing and accepting who we are. And that's lifelong work. That's not something you arrive at and say, "Oh, got it." You're constantly coming back to that. I think that being in community is the other part that's really important, and figuring out what that means. So we've gotten so far away from what it means to be in community, right? We live by ourselves, we eat alone, our social capital is almost destroyed in some places. We barely have relationships with our family. I'm talking about myself as well, so I'm not pointing fingers here. And so I think we're coming into maybe a new sense of what community is. Our communities are now found communities, in the sense that we do have the choice to make community. And in the past, we were more limited, of course, by geography and lack of travel, and more limited to our immediate families. We now have this explosive ability to really expand what community can mean for each of us. But it's still really important to try to grasp the idea that comes out of Africana philosophy, Ubuntu, the idea that we are because of other people. What does that mean for you? How can your decisions, your choices, be guided by what's good for a group of people and not just for yourself? That is harder for some of us than others. It's super hard if you're in America. Like, it doesn't even make sense to many Americans that you would make choices based on the group. In some cultures that makes total sense. But I think that generally speaking, that's something that each of us needs to be working on. How do we work in community, understand what our role is in the community, and try to figure out how to really optimally situate ourselves in a community. And then, of course, it's that community to community. Like, how do we then work within our own group, but cooperate with other groups of people? What does that mean? That's another area that we need to simultaneously be thinking and talking about. What are we doing? What are we contributing to life that not only helps our group, but connects us to others? And of course, our connection to nature underlies all of this. And I think that, again, we've got so many choices now of what that can be. So in my own work, for example, I keep coming back to farming. In the past, I've done some farming. Right now, I'm not, and I really miss it. But I make sure that everything I do somehow connects to food and farming and farm justice and work. I just feel like getting your hands dirty in the growing of food and the tending of animals often is just one of the most fundamental relationships that we can have to nature. And so that's important to me. It doesn't have to be farming for everybody, but I think we all do need to have a relationship with our food, and that's going to be increasingly important. Climate change is going to cause a lot of movement around, and it is going to make us think about where our home is, where we're going to be located, because many of the places where we now live are going to become uninhabitable in the next 25 years. It's going to be so difficult to live in some of our cities. And the scientists are hedging their bets constantly because that's how science is done. And you're always questioning your own assumptions, right? That's the scientific method. You're always going for, well, maybe this is true. But if you talk to scientists when they're not writing a paper or in front of a conference, they'll say, we're giving you the low figure. The glacier that we're worried about breaking up and sea level rise is going to go up 50 meters. We're telling you that's 15 years away. It could be 5.
Yeah.
And so the new reports that came out this week even are pointing to tipping points, these irreversible effects where once something gets going, like the melting of a glacier or the melting of the permafrost, the actual event causes a positive feedback loop. And then there's nothing we can do to stop it. It's just going on its own. And we're reaching those tipping points in a number of areas. And once we do, the speed of change, I think, is going to really surprise people. So everyone was complaining this summer. As you know, I was in Berlin. I'm in Germany now. And it was hot, right? It was super hot. There were a couple of days and weeks where it was just really, really hot. People were complaining, and I kept saying, "This is the coolest summer we're going to have in the next, this foreseeable future." Of course, that's not a great way to make friends, but it's true, right? It is true that everything we experienced this summer, in terms of heat, in terms of droughts, the trajectory is for that to get worse. Will there be a summer it might be a little cooler? Of course, right? Because there's variability. But the general direction that's going is that it's going to get hotter. We're going to have more and more serious droughts. We're going to have bigger storms. The fires are already out of control. So for me, this knowledge, this connection, this knowledge of what's going on environmentally was a really important milestone for me personally in my own career. As you see, I've kind of had my ladder against many different walls. And that's because I'm very restless and I really like to know a lot about a lot of things.
Well, you have a very integrative mind and way of seeing things.
Yeah, and I love that position. I really, the polymath, right? I want to know how things connect with each other. but I did realize at some point, probably about 20 years ago, that understanding environmental change was absolutely fundamental, and that I had to do something to contribute to this discussion. And so I feel like I've been really lucky that way to study this, to be able to explain it, to write about it. Yes, you know, I teach this to my undergraduate students, which is tricky. It's always tricky to teach a pretty depressing topic to 19-year-olds, right? For
Yes.
whom the task is one of hopefulness.
And they're
And,
launching into this world.
right. And I'm very mindful of that as a responsibility. I obviously learn a lot from them, which is why I love teaching, but I'm also mindful of the fact that, okay, I need to be able to talk about these things that we're talking about now and explain this transition and do it in a way that doesn't kill all hope, but also is very realistic. And that's just a goal for me. I can't tell you I have a magic formula, but I'm constantly thinking about that. And it is hard. I sometimes I look around the classroom and after I've made one of these statements about how hot the summers are, and I think, oh my goodness, what have I just done, right? Because they're all looking at me like, what are we going to do?
Mm.
And maybe that's the energy that really feeds me, because what I do see young people who are a little confused, a little angry, a little frightened, and asking that question, what do we do? And that's the moment that I like to seize. I think in that question is just pregnant with possibility, right? Because I always point out to them, okay, here's a whole group of us who are saying, okay, now what? What do we do? And the answer is right here in this room, which means turning to each other, asking that question, and then also like really thinking what you do is going to be different. It's going to be your own contribution. You don't have to do everything. None of us have to. None of us can. We need to find our own piece in this puzzle and do that knowing that there's this whole community of other people who are working on it as well.
Well, what's beautiful in what you're saying is that we each have our own creative contribution, that we do live in the diversity of all of our uniqueness and our different gifts. But what you're talking about that I think is so important is reclaiming that indigenous wisdom, that we're all interconnected, that we're all in relationship, and we're in relationship not only with each other, but with nature. And I love too well, I know your deep connection to nature and to plants and to farming. And part of what I think is so important in what you described about people coming back into more direct connection with their food, with the earth, with plants and animals, is that not only are we motivated by fear about climate change and all of these shifts that we're in, but I think at a deeper level, our motivation to change is sustained by coming back into love and into that deep reverence for the earth and understanding of our interconnectedness with everything around us.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, Heather. It's also very healing and in an immediate way, which I think is surprising to people, right? So now there's always research coming out, which I love. I love the fact that we have so many people studying these kind of spiritual things like nature therapy, right? So now there's brain research that shows if you're out in the woods for half an hour, your brain chemistry changes, right? So something which we've known forever, but okay, here's the proof. And I think I love that because what it points to is that it's a reciprocal relationship. We are taking care of something that is also taking care of us. We are fundamentally connected. And even the structures are the same. And right now I'm working on a project about planetary materials. And one of the subsets of what I'm doing is looking at the structure of networks, right? So the mycelia, the way that the trees connect to each other and talk to each other, our brains, the cosmos, there's this fundamental structure that looks like a network, almost like an internet, a computer network, right? Where you have nodes connecting to other nodes and these kind of infinite connections. And that structure is so similar in all of us, right? From the tiniest to the largest, to the cosmos. So things like that get me really excited, because I think that we're not separate from that. We have new research on trees, which shows the incredible amount of communication, right? So we make these ridiculous Hollywood movies, right, about the mother tree, and we find out that all of that is actually true, right? The mother tree in an ecosystem, in a forest, is not only communicating to every other tree in that forest, it's communicating across species, it's communicating to non-tree species. There are just intricate patterns of things happening. One side of the forest can be experiencing something, and their communication can go all the way to the other side. And then there's this coordination that I just love this research, right? Because I feel like we are part of that. And when we immerse ourselves in the forest, in that world, our neurons, our neuronal structure also changes.
Yes.
And we start communicating in the sense of the way our neurons are firing. We start communicating with these other structures. So then it becomes not at all strange that if we do that more often, if we do that mindfully, of course we can talk to and communicate with the plant world. We can talk to and communicate with animals, because we're doing it at the level of what, and I'll date myself here, what hippies used to call vibes, right? And then we found out, again through research, that that's a real thing. You put 5 people in a room, you measure their brain waves, and after what, 20 minutes, half an hour, their brain waves are all now firing at more or less the same rate. So you have created a communication there that changes things on a physiological level. If that can happen in a room full of people, of course that can happen out in the forest. Of course we can have that level of communication, right? So as you can tell, I get super excited about this.
Well, I love it. I love it. And the other thing that I think is important, when we spend time in nature, as the HeartMath Institute research has shown, we start coming more from our hearts than our brains, and then our brains are getting entrained to our hearts rather than the other way around. And you're also talking about that deeper spiritual understanding that everything around us is conscious. So we're relating to the consciousness of the plants and the animals and the cosmos. And then we can remember that we can be in communication and communion with all that is. And that brings us back into that sense of right relationship, right harmony, instead of the dynamic of power over or separation or exploitation, which is beautiful.
Yeah, I'm writing a book right now that is taking me into some research about this very thing, about what is consciousness in the non-human world, and then even the idea of animism, right? So I'm looking at especially African diaspora ideas of animism, and animism in both what we consider living or biotic materials, but also animism in abiotic, in things that were traditionally considered inert, non-living, right, in the Western classification. And in Africana philosophy, especially in West Africa, animism of all objects existed. And that's a difficult concept, right, for Western trained scientists to understand. So I've really been trying to figure out what does that mean, that everything is imbued with spirit. And
Yes.
that's kind of the definition of what animism means in this case. And it's not that strange to think about, right? Because we take objects, whether they're crystals or, it could be bowls or something we've created. We understand it has the spirit of the creator, right? We definitely understand that about our artwork, and things that we make with our hands. We also take, again, things, and they have ceremonial spirit, and we understand, the Pope's ring, or God rest her soul, the Queen's diamonds, right? And I promise, I'm not going to talk about that, but we can if you want to. And we understand the power and significance, the spirit of these items that are not alive in traditional ways, right? So it's not that far-fetched
Yes.
for us to imbue spirit to, quote, inanimate objects.
Yes. It's
And
deeply shamanic.
yes. So I'm really interested right now in what is the power in us recognizing the spirit, both in all things, both inanimate and definitely, of course, in our plants, in our animals, and that's an important realm for us to understand. And there's a lot of good work being undertaken right now on what should our relationship with animals be. It's been so exploitative. It doesn't have to be. What is the purpose of that relationship? And the same thing with the plant world. So plants are spiritually connected, but not in the same way that humans are. And plants have an essence, a reason that is very different from ours. They are actually here to give, right? That is part of their essence, is the giving, the creation of oxygen, right? The giving of life. So we tend, especially in the West, to understand these things from that Hollywood, kind of Disney perspective, right? Where we think of animism and we immediately think of cartoons, and we want to anthropomorphize things, but it's a little more complicated than that, because it's not just the aliveness or the spirit of plants and animals, but it's also their purpose, if you will.
Yeah.
Their essence,
and their unique consciousness.
Right, their consciousness, which is not human consciousness.
And circling back to what you're saying about crystals and stones, if you think about it, just like I do believe our bones hold a lot of the memories of our stories and our experiences. I think the stones are the bones of the earth and carry such memories of larger cycles of our history here on the planet. And I think some of what we're really understanding from connecting to the messages written in the earth is that we go through these cycles every 12 to 13,000 years of radical earth change and of potential cataclysmic crisis. But if we can remember, come back into connection with the memories, the wisdom that the earth herself holds, and come back into right relationship, I do believe we have the power, if enough of us shift our consciousness and come back into right relationship, to heal with the earth. But if we don't, then I think we are on a path towards this cataclysmic reset, because the earth will heal and reset. It's just, will we come back into harmony and balance, or will we stay on this destructive trajectory?
Right.
But the other thing that you talk about, Claudia, that I think is so powerful and that you live and embody is rebalancing left brain and right brain ways of knowing. So you've got an amazing integrative analytical mind, but you're an artist and a storyteller. And you, I think, are really also reminding us that these new paradigms that we need to move into need to honor those right brain, intuitive, more spiritual ways of knowing. And the right brain is much more relational. And, I don't know if you know the neuropsychologist Alan Shore, but one of the statements he makes is, if we don't, as humanity, really become more right-brained again, we're on a path of self-destruction, because the left brain is ultimately about separation, competition, self and object. And it's the right brain that knows how to be in relationship and see the patterns and the interconnectedness of everything.
Oh, that's
And I,
great.
and I, and I love that what you're doing right now with the research that you're doing integrates your scholarship and your gifts as an artist.
Yeah, it's super exciting. So I'm actually right here in my office in Gießen, Germany, which is the southern, kind of towards the southern part of Germany, central south, not far from Frankfurt, at Justus Liebig University, and it's the panel on planetary thinking. And the fellowship is a combination of science and art, which is just brilliant. And
Yes.
the topic that I'm looking at is planetary materials, and I'm trying to figure out what that means. But I have a studio right here to my side, to my right, laid out with my artwork. I'm doing some collage work, which is one of the mediums that I like working in. And it's been wonderful for so many reasons. One, it helps me think, right? It's meditative for me to do art. It takes me out of the heady academic space, which I need to get out of sometimes. And it is just very meditative, and because it's collage and involves paper and color and lots of knives and scissors, I have to be very careful and concentrate, right? So it's a lot of fun in that way. That's one wonderful thing about it. The second thing I really like about it, and one of my colleagues said this about a poem and art piece that I just put together this weekend. When he read it, he said, "Well, it's all right there in 2 pages." And I said, "Yeah, that's exactly it. It's 30 words, 2 pages, a few images, and the entire thing that we're trying to get at, everything you and I have just said, all of it is right there." And that's the beauty of art, right? That's the beauty of story, is that we're appealing not to the mind, the thoughts, but we really are appealing to the heart space. And we need to do that. The science, the information, all of that about climate change is there. We know it. Many of us can recite it, not just scientists, and yet we're not having a change, right? And that's because we need to get to people's hearts. So for me, it is really important that we do this through the arts, be that visual arts, music, storytelling, dance, however, right? That we need to really address that feeling space in people, so that there can be those aha moments, which are very personal, they're very specific, right? So everybody can look at a painting or read a poem, and everyone's reaction will be slightly different, but it will be guided by the vision of the creator, and it will be guided by the subject matter in a way that's very helpful. So I really love that part of it. And yeah, everything that you've said, that creative nature, that's one of the things that we have as humans, right? And we're not the only species that creates. Far and away, we're not. But it is one of our big things. And many indigenous peoples have said it is one of our responsibilities. So you look at communities where they talk, again, around the world about the human responsibility to nature is to tell the story, to dream, to sing,
Beautiful.
dance, to do that creative part, which is giving voice to the experience, right? And that is our responsibility to the natural world, because it is something that we uniquely can do for other species. So I love that part of it.
Wow, that is a beautiful way to put it. It's like in our gratitude and in our honoring, we're mirroring back that awareness of the beauty around us. And our self-consciousness enables us to really make that that gratitude known and give it form. But I also love, Claudia, that you're doing collage, because one of the themes that you talk about in the paper that you wrote that I thought was so powerful is the importance of remembering, really bringing back these lost parts of ourselves and bringing things back into connection, back into relationship. And collage is taking the pieces and remembering them in a new shape and a new pattern and a new form. That's beautiful.
Absolutely, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's absolutely putting pieces together and reshaping them. And I'm having a lot of fun with it because it's teaching me so much as I'm doing it. I'm really trying to understand the idea of the planetary, because the planetary is kind of in a way, a new paradigm scientifically and for environmentalists and for politicians, and it's very much interdisciplinary, a new way of thinking about this era. So we're moving out of the global, because the global really was about separation, about nation states, about globalization. It was very atomized. The planetary recognizes that what we're doing exists as a part of a larger system that is very much interdependent. We can't do anything right here at this point A that doesn't affect the entire system. It is impossible. It's like that saying, when you throw something away, there is no away, right? We have that unfortunate saying of throwing it away. That's a myth, right? There's no way. It's just part of a system. So planetary is reminding us that we are part of the system on Earth, but then it also positions us in the cosmos. And that's the other part I like, right? Because if you look at the planetary system, we immediately have to understand our relationship to our solar system, to our moon, to the other planets here, and then to the universe, etc. Right? So I'm excited about being part of this. It's a great opportunity for me, and I'm really learning a lot as I'm doing this.
It's beautiful, and you're speaking my language. That, I think as we move into the age of Aquarius, we're being called to remember we're galactic beings, and that we need to come back into that sense of our interrelatedness, our interconnectedness with the cosmos. And yet we can't do that if we don't come back into right relationship within ourselves, and then with each other and with our own planet. So before we stop, I love your bigger sense of the shifts that we're needing to go through in this time of transformation. And yet you also really share that wisdom about how we can each start to do it in our own ways, by holding ourselves with compassion, by coming into connection and relationship with our tribe, with those that we are in community with, and then begin those changes at the grassroots level, in essence, to be co-creating the world we want to be in now. Is there anything you would add to that in terms of what we can do in our own process? And maybe part of that, as you're saying, is do art, connect to nature, do those things that bring us back into that right harmony, right relationship.
Yeah, I think those things are important. And what I've also found, and even more so right now, and even more so with the current group of students I have, is that we have to deal with our fear and our trauma. So we know right now there's a mental health crisis among
Yes.
undergraduate students, for example. So that's the population that I spend the most time with. And they're very openly talking about the trauma that they're facing, but I think we all are. So I'm really interested in this idea of how do we deal with fear, how do we deal with trauma, and this is where it comes back to the path of the midwife, right? Something that again was a gift that I feel was given to me very early in my career to be able to understand that process, the process of birth, and the role of the midwife in helping somebody through what is essentially a potentially very frightening process, right? And midwifery was very much around what is your role to help the person through this, because you can't do it for them. I'll never forget the midwife who trained us the very first time she met us, and we were all kind of wide-eyed 20-year-olds. And she said, well, you should be able to walk into a room with a woman who's in labor and deliver her and the baby safely and have absolutely nothing in your hands. You just walk in the room and you can do that. And we all were like, really? But I understood after working with her for quite some time exactly what she meant, because really that process, it's not about the equipment. It's fundamentally about being observant and about holding space for somebody who's going through a pretty intense event, where fear is definitely a part of it. Pain is a part of it. Fear is a part of it. So how do you hold space for that? How do you get through the transition? And I think collectively we're in transition right now. We're in a space that is frightening, where many of us have trauma, birth trauma, if you will, right, in that sense, and fear about what's to come. And those of us like yourself who are doing this work of understanding are really midwifing this transition for us collectively. And a lot of that means sitting with people and helping them to get through it. You don't give birth by stopping it, right? You can. It's one of those things, like many traumas, you can only do it by going through. Many people, much wiser than I am, said, you know, when you get to a place that's very dark, just keep walking, right? That whole idea of you can't run backwards. You definitely don't want to stop.
Yeah.
And you kind of want to get to a place of where you keep going, right?
Yeah.
Because going through our fear, going through our trauma, addressing it in a supportive way, because it is so easy to be re-traumatized. So I'm very aware of this, and speaking very seriously about the fact that if you're dealing with significant trauma or fear, you probably need help to get through it. It's not necessarily something you can do on your own, but it is definitely not about withdrawing from it. And many of us need to enter into it and understand the fear. That's the birthing part of it, right? To really get into it and deal with it and experience it to get to the other side of it. It's also very cyclical. So our traumas, it's very much like peeling an onion, right? Each time you re-experience whatever are the fundamental things that you're dealing with that are scary, every time around that circle is a little bit easier. It's not like a straight trajectory. Oops, I got that.
Spiral path.
Right, it's more of a spiral path. So it helps to have helpers and guides who can remind you of that. And I've also talked about before that idea of the diamond on the bottom of the cave, right? So sometimes when you feel like you're about to fall into the abyss, and you might, and many of us do, when we're dealing with trauma, dealing with mental health issues, we go to these very dark places. Sometimes it's a matter of getting down there and realizing that those are the places where some of the richness also exists. And that diamonds are in fact forged from incredible darkness and pressure. And so we begin to know, okay, you don't want to hang out in those dark places. You want to figure out how to climb out of these spaces, but not to be fearful of going through hard times. So maybe that, collectively we're going through hard times.
Yes, yes, and through collective trauma, but you're so profoundly, I mean, that image of the birthing process, and also it feels like you're so profoundly talking about the process of alchemy, that we're in this cauldron. That means we have to face our fear, face our wounds, face our fear of death in order to move into new life, in order to find the true gold in who we are. But thank you, Claudia, for being in this conversation. Thank you for being such a wise and healing midwife to so many in this time, and the way in which you're supporting our moving into planetary consciousness and into new paradigms. So thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you for all that you've shared and helped me with and helped me to understand, as well as all the people that you've touched. So thank you.
All right.